Wonderful to have you all here. Now, because we have very limited time with what we're going to be doing, I am most likely we're going to have this session going pretty quickly, but I do want to welcome you all to address something that is not just about the US, but what's going on in the US has seemed to trigger a whole lot of activity around the globe. And a lot of things, as what is common for what happens in the US, starts to affect everywhere else. Okay, so I am Dr. Lisa Ann Chung. I am a political leadership strategist, but I'm also the president for Kenley College that is hosting today's webinar on DEI and is it destroying your leadership credibility? A lot of people are focused on the DEI side, but they are not looking at the implications and the impact on leadership credibility. So we are going to dive right in. I just wanted to give you, for those of you who are not familiar with Kenley College, let me just give you a little rundown on what Kenley College is. So Kenley College is an online training organization, even though we are able to go into organizations, government and political organizations, and provide training as well. But the focus for us is leadership training and strategy for government and politics. We offer accredited certificate programs. We also have customized training and workshops, whether that's virtual or online, and on-demand courses. Okay, so looking at the global picture, I talked about what was going on in the US. The president of the US looked at this whole concept of DEI, and that's President Donald Trump looked at this whole idea of what was happening with DEI as being unconstitutional and immoral. Oh my gosh, this is big, because people don't realize how much it's not just affecting the government and political arena, which of course, we are very interested in, but it's affecting other areas as well. And a lot of people believe that the DEI initiatives started to shut down once Trump got back into power. It didn't, We were actually seeing companies shutting down their DEI programs from 2023. Part of that being, if you knew some of the campaigns that were being shared globally, or more so, of course, more targeting the US, there were some elements of DEI, that's how we'll say it, elements of DEI that some people felt went to such an extreme that they started to boycott certain brands. They started to boycott certain companies. And that began to be felt significantly by those companies. One of the big ones I know that had come up, and there were a number of big ones, was that Costco was saying they were doubling down on their DEI efforts. But many people didn't know the backside of that, which was that even though they were saying that and they were also going to be increasing salaries, the fact is most of those people were not even on proper contracts, and they could easily be let go if the wage price was going to be too high for that company. So it has a lot of implications, and some of those implications are financial. Now, when we come to the concept of DEI in a global context, different countries are addressing it in different ways, and what they consider to be important and what they may focus on in terms of these diversity, equity, and inclusion areas will vary from country to country, even though many people think it's just a US thing. It is not just a US thing. Well, I'm in the UK. We have indications of DEI here as well. And it's going to be interesting to see if what started in the US with the government deciding that it was not going to be funding any more DEI initiatives with federal funds, if that will happen here in the UK as well and in other countries, because once the US takes the lead, other countries follow suit. Now, it may be different because at this moment, our government is more of a socialist government, and that might mean that they have more liberal perspectives on different topics. So it is up to them how they work with that. So some of the things that we want to touch today, I'm going to look at it from the perspective of the roots. Then we're going to look at some of the effects of it. I'm definitely going to bring in some principles, and every now and again, I might, even though I have a set place for principles, who knows, I might be pushing a few of them along the way. And then we'll go to leading beyond DEI. Of course, as time permits, we are going to wrap up for you and give you an opportunity to ask questions. So what about this whole thing of the roots of the DEI? But I said, I'm going to start with where I'm at. That's the best place to start. So here in the UK, we have what's called the 9 protected characteristics. I'm not going to go into all of them, but I know globally, some of the big ones may be the sex, it may be related to sexual orientation or race. Some of them might be some countries where they have a multicultural context or a multi-religious environment. There may be the implications of religion or belief. But we have 9 here in the UK, so it is up to the countries, which the UN wanted to encourage all countries to enforce some kind of anti-discrimination legislation. So that's where we are today, but it doesn't start there. I believe that some of what we see, modern, because I'm sure if you go back in history, you might find some things with DEI back then too. But let's look at more modern, and modern is relative. But if we go back to the civil rights movement, where Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the forerunners or at the forefront of this movement, he had a speech that is constantly quoted in many different contexts. And I want us to appreciate that speech. There's a part of it where he says, I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. In other words, let us move the color for a positive reason or a negative reason out of the mix, and let's focus more on character. Let's focus on why we're judging people and on what grounds we should be judging them. Should we really be judging people based on criteria that they have no control over, or should we be judging people by the criteria that they actually are intentionally a part of building in themselves? So now let's go quickly into the effects. Now, when you look at this whole concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I started with where this came out of. So from a roots perspective, it came out of a need to ensure that there weren't people being discriminated against. And that's a good thing. It needed to bring some level of equality. If you know about Martin Luther King Jr., the focus for him was equality. But I'll talk about that in a moment. So diversity has now become, for the DEI focus, is not just about, instead of it being about another factor of diversity, it's become more about the skin color. It's become more about the race. It's become things like your sexual preferences. I gave you some of the 9 protected characteristics. So when we select you then within the government and political arena, when we appoint you, when we promote you, do we first go to the external characteristics that you have no control over, or these other characteristics that you can't control, or you choose as a preference, but has no implications to indicate if you could do the job or not? This, though, within the DEI focus may find itself more focused on ensuring that we have representation of these different races, of these different groups, okay? But it is not about the diversity of thought. Now, here, let me quickly add this. A lot of times you hear the argument presented that in order to have diversity of thought, you have to have essentially diversity of bodies. You have to have diversity of these races and ethnic groups. But is that the case? And then when we touch on to equity, equity now becomes this issue of not so much the equality that Martin Luther King Jr. was pushing for. It wasn't about the equality. If you watch his speech and you see his speech, he doesn't talk about equity, he talks about equality. And equity is about equal outcomes. But having equal outcomes does not automatically assume that we have equal inputs. And so again, do we get consolation prizes? You know, those things where we give these children something, you showed up, you participated, oh, you get a prize. It has nothing to do with if the child did well or not. It was the fact that you showed up. We don't want that, but I'll come to that. Don't worry, I'll come to it. I'll tell you why. That shouldn't be the focus. And then inclusion was no longer about just about having a space at the table. It became more where you didn't want to feel excluded, in the sense of you didn't want people to step on toes. You didn't want to have what I call the cuts and the scrapes. No cuts, no scrapes, no bruises, what we call microaggressions. And people became, sadly, so afraid of what they considered to be a microaggression that they missed something in the midst. They miss that sometimes people say things just like you say things. And how it was interpreted is not how it was intended. And so someone might say something, and are you interpreting what they said based on their external characteristics, but you don't want to be judged on yours? And so when we get highly, I've got to say it, please forgive me, I've got to say this. When we get highly offended, and I am not, please understand me, I'm not saying that some people aren't doing and saying things that they know will hurt, they know will cut and scrape, if I can say it like that. I'm saying give people an opportunity to learn. Bring the situation into the context where it brings about growth for everybody. It helps for learning. It helps for communication. It helps for building relationships. Let me give you a nice example. So I was in a context of watching one male in an organizational team among a lot of females. I didn't have a problem with the male. I realized that sometimes he'd say some things that he obviously hadn't thought about, and I didn't get offended. I just had to put him in his place sometimes, and you know better than that. And we had this wonderful understanding. We got along really well, but sometimes the other females would pull me aside and they would be so frustrated with him. And they would say, did you see how he said that to me? Did you see that he said that to me? And it made me feel so inferior. And I would often ask the question, well, did you tell him? Did you tell him that it bothered you? Did you tell him that it hurt to hear what he said? And they're like, no, I don't feel like I should tell him, but what if he doesn't know? And so he continued to operate this way. And I kind of got to understand the heart of the person if some female would just pull him aside and just say, you know, maybe you could have said this a different way. And I found it interesting that he knew how to speak to me because he knew what I would accept and what I wouldn't accept. And there was no big hoopla. But if we don't bring people into that place of growth, we don't bring unity, we don't create opportunities to communicate, just like how people are in relationships and personal relationships. Are you going to take the time all the time to get offended about everything? Or are you going to take the time to communicate? Because we're all on different planets. It's not just that men are from Mars and women are from Venus. Some of those men from Venus too, and the women from Mars. So until we bring things out to the open without necessarily being confrontational, but to allow it to be a learning opportunity, we can't really have inclusion, because you will have one side feeling that these people are saying this against me, and you will have another side wondering, why is this side so easily offended on the least little thing? Because they don't understand. Both sides don't understand, and they've not opened up the communication to allow that understanding to happen. And I find Nelson Mandela's quote was very, very interesting to me, because people are looking at sometimes this whole thing of almost like an enemy territory. And he says, if you want to make peace with your enemy, you know, those people who you feel may be holding you back from what you need to get into and the roles that you want to go to. He says, if you make peace with your enemy, you have to work with your enemy. Then he becomes your partner. It's almost like there's this gradual process. But I believe hidden in that of what Nelson Mandela was saying, because he was just a wonderful diplomat, was learning how to work with people with whom you have extreme differences and extremely different insights and outlooks on the world and situations and context, so that instead of this person now continuing to be seen as the enemy, the person can now be seen as a partner. We can work together. That is how he was able to become the first Black president of South Africa, at a time when he spent so many years in jail. He spent just under 30 years in jail because of the color of his skin. And yet he learned how to deal with brokering relationships and building relationships in such a way that it led to him being an obvious choice for president. Now, I have a problem with the current DEI. And when I say it, I'm almost moving towards more that extreme activist when I say this. So let me be clear, because there might be a place for this, but within the context of what we're going to be talking about today. So one of the things that I see is a problem with it is that our group category, notice how I have that in quotes, our group category does not equal the same or even similar experiences and worldview. So in other words, when we say we want to have more of X group represented and more of this Y group represented, it's assuming that once you are in X group or you are in Y group, that anybody who makes up X group has the same understanding about life, has the same perspectives on life, has similar experiences. Listen, the reason that I told you about Martin Luther King Jr. was nobody has a Black section on the bus anymore, just as an example. There is no more Black water fountains. And so people are exposed to different things regardless of their race background, regardless of their age, regardless of their gender, regardless of even things like nationality, regardless of religious beliefs. I mean, you think about it, even within the context of the same religion, you say we believe in the same thing and maybe the same God. And yet, you could have people within those same groupings having a different worldview. So if we say we need more of this group, define this group. And the other thing that I see as a problem with it is, instead of us moving forward in unity, that's the one nation, a lot of these extreme aspects of the DEI initiatives seek to move us backwards into segregated groups. We want to be seen as this group. We want to be seen as X group. You actually identify yourself by a grouping. And by identifying yourself as this kind of people think this way, you are contributing to the segregation that the likes of Martin Luther King Jr. worked so hard to end. So instead of now moving forward, you're actually moving backward. And that, I don't think that that's what is intended, even by some who promote and want to see more diversity, for example, in government and politics. Is it that they truly want to have segregated caucuses? Or do they want to have unified groups working together for the good of the community, the city, the nation? Now, there are loads of principles. We only have a few minutes on this webinar. So I'm going to narrow it down for you. And the concept is for us to get to this point of leadership credibility. And when we're talking about leadership credibility, there are two key things I think we need to look at within the context of assessing any kind of DEI initiative or any kind of DEI push or thinking. One is the management ability, and the other is identity. Now, this identity is not the way you think it is, but we'll proceed. And then they are going to be moving together to a common vision. So whatever management ability is coming into place with the identity, they have got to have a vision that they're working towards to then determine is their leadership credibility. Now, let me quickly say for people who may be putting questions in the chat, I will address the questions at the end, but that doesn't stop you from putting your questions, okay? Now, what about management ability? Now, we're not just talking about management, we're talking about management ability. One aspect of this is to understand that everyone has a responsibility to manage at some level. Titles aren't necessary. Nothing in there is telling you about external characteristics, right? It's saying we all have a responsibility to manage at some level. And each person has a different degree of that management ability. So if we're looking at it from a managing perspective, a management perspective, in terms of whether it is at an organizational level, maybe you can even go back and say an individual level. If you are looking at it in terms of what is happening at a national level, maybe your city, your state, your county, and you have a management responsibility to the people. And even if you are not in an official leadership role, that's why I say titles are not necessary. Every single person down to the cleaner is responsible for managing something for the sake of the people. Now, they may or may not have direct contact with the general public, doesn't matter. Everyone has some kind of management responsibility. And when we are looking to assess people, we assess them based on these things. We assess them based on their management ability. We assess them based on their responsibility. And when we're talking about management ability, we're talking about two sides. There is the management side and there is the ability side. We want to know that you are understanding that there are certain talents you have. Some people have more. There are certain skills you have. Some people have more. But how do you manage that ability that you already have? How do you manage the abilities that are coming in your government organization, maybe that are coming into your political organization? How are you managing abilities for the good of the people? Not DEI characteristics, abilities. See, I'm of this view that if you now begin to put in place certain key elements and start to manage well and have clear criteria for, let's say, hiring, clear criteria for selecting, clear criteria for promoting. In other words, you're managing things right. And you have a system, a structure of management, then a lot of what we're trying to push for will automatically fall into place. Because now you choose people. You select them, you promote them, you appoint them based on their ability to manage. That is your first and foremost responsibility of leadership. Your first and foremost responsibility is not to ensure that these people with certain criteria, certain characteristics are selected and ensure that we have percentages. The problem with wanting to go to percentages, and you would find that if you have the percentages and that's your criteria, anybody who meets the criteria is fine. Anybody who makes a number based on those superficial, external, let's call it external. It's not, it's more than that, but let's make life easier. Anybody, once they meet those external criteria, the first person who walks in the door and meets that external criteria, you can select because you have, your focus is to have a certain percentage. But if your first focus is to assess management ability, then you are not going to look for if they are one or the other. You're going to look for ability first. You're going to look for management ability first. And that becomes the priority. Now, even though it's the priority, doesn't mean that you cannot ensure that other people that, hello, let's look and see, once they meet the core criteria first. Because I think what's happened is a lot of times some of the people are getting frustrated because they're saying, how come you couldn't find a better representative of X group? Is that the best you have of X group? Well, it was the first one that walked in the door that met the criteria of the externals. But if you go in with management ability first, you can get the best of both worlds. Now, when you are talking about promoting, there are some people you do not, can I emphasize that? You do not want to promote because they are going to be chaotic to the success, to what you want to have in your organization, what you want to have in your nation. These are not the people that when the world stage is looking on, because we're talking about government and politics, then the world stage is looking on them, especially when they're in more prominent positions, that the world is looking on and saying, what were they thinking? And that's the person that you want to represent your nation? Come on. By this time, the international community could care less about the DEI. They're sending their best. But hello, you you got to tick boxes. So you do not want to promote people who will not take responsibility for what the tasks and what was presented to them. You do not want to promote people who are lazy. You do not want to promote people who then blame somebody else for what they didn't accomplish. And the reason that I didn't get it was because that one was looking at me with some microaggression, or that one didn't like me because of XYZ. In other words, you don't want to promote people who are more focused on what does not matter and what counts, what the assignment that's given to them, what they're supposed to be accountable for. They have left that and seen that as so insignificant. And then they blame you or they blame somebody else because they will not take responsibility. I don't want to hear people saying, it's because I am X, or it's because I am Y. That's why you have an issue with what I did. I want to see people who will take responsibility. You fell down on the job, you made a mistake. There's nothing wrong with taking responsibility. But if we have people who will not accept the responsibility, we don't want to be promoting them. We don't want to promote people who will blame somebody else for their lack of performance. And when people are blaming somebody else for their lack of performance and they get fired, it's not discrimination. It's now the organization's management responsibility. It's now the government or the federal government or your national government's responsibility. It's their management responsibility to ensure that they are not using taxpayer dollars to continue to let people stay in roles who are looking to blame somebody else because they are not doing what they're supposed to do. We all have a responsibility to take what we have in terms of talents and skills and abilities and refine them for the good of the people that we're here to serve. And if we refuse to do it, we refuse to perform, we refuse to do what even our ability allows. And as a result, people go, you got to go because you're refusing to meet up to the standard of your ability. It's not discrimination. It's management responsibility. So what happens when things get it to the extreme? Anybody got any idea of what would happen when DEI gets to the extreme? Anybody want to put something in the chat? What happens in your mind when DEI is at its extreme operation? Okay. I need to have more students who are listening. It is where you have the blame game coming in. It is where that blame game comes in. Don't miss it. It's consistent. And then you may have rallies, you may have protests, you may have all kinds of backlash, as they might call it, because the whole ralliers around them say you should not have let him go, and you let him go because of a DEI characteristic that they wanted you to bring him in because of those characteristics. But now you let him go based on it. No, you let him go because of the responsibility. Okay? So it says the individual is not responsible, and no matter what happens on their watch, somebody else is to blame. But I want you to know that the more you have been given to manage, this is why it's so good to understand that management ability, because the other side of it is, regardless of criteria, if you manage well, you will be trusted with more to manage. So your responsibility is, I'm going to focus on managing well, because I want to have the opportunity to be given more to manage. I want to be entrusted with greater management responsibility. The more you manage, the more you find yourself getting those promotions, the more you prove how well you have mastered that management ability. Look for the promotions, look for the appointments, look for the selections. They are coming. They are coming because of how effectively you managed. So you might have been in one role, and now they said, oh, you did so well at that role. We want to put you to a next level. We want to take you to the next level. We want to, it may not be that you literally have a higher level, but the breadth of your responsibility starts to increase. And the other one that I wanted to look at was this concept of identity. So a few years ago, I remember writing something and saying how a lot of people were saying they are not giving us a space at the table. And at the time, the term DEI was not a big thing. People weren't using it. It seems like it has blown up a lot in the last 4 years in particular. I can't really tell you exactly what contributed to that, but that's what seemed to have happened. And people were saying, oh, we don't get a place at the table. And I said, well, how about you create your own table? And you bring people around your table. Why do you have to wait to get invited to somebody else's table? Create your own table. Am I saying segregate? No, I say create a space for yourself. Create a space for yourself so that your gifts, your talents, your abilities can be so maximized that the people at the other table start looking at your table and go like, what's going on over there? And then they want to come to your table because your table is so effective. It's like, make what you have be so evident and so much on display that they cannot miss it. I have a quote here, there can be no diversity without individuality. So yes, we've been pushing for diversity all along, but what about getting back to the individual? What about appreciating what you have to offer as an individual, not allowing yourself to get lumped into any group, but appreciating your uniqueness, your individuality? Remember I said we were missing the diversity of thought because we were so focused on the diversity of the externalities. Well, how about if we got to the point where we said, you know something, I have something unique to bring to the table, and I want to share it. I want to offer it. I want to give it free. I want to help and be able to make my team, my department, my organization actually perform a whole lot better. And I know I have this to offer. How about offering it? How about appreciating your own uniqueness, your own identity? Nobody but you has the iris you have. Nobody but you have the fingerprint you have. When they go and you go to the airport and they say they got to do that biometrics and they're looking you in your eye, or that camera is looking you in your eye, or they're looking at your finger and they're asking you to put this thumb and these fingers and all this, press it down. No, you ain't pressing it down hard enough. Why? Because they're not looking for diversity then. They're looking for individuality. They're looking for the things that make you unique. Now you take that into how you perform, how you are making a difference. If you are looking to get into politics or you're into government at different levels, how are you making your individuality felt where you are? I believe that some people should be insulted by being lumped. You should never allow yourself to be seen as everybody else from the so-called group. You are an individual. Make the most of that. Bring all of that to the table. And I want us to begin to celebrate you. I want us to celebrate the individual. I don't want us to celebrate the group identity. I want us to celebrate your individual identity. There are capabilities that you have. Can we celebrate that? There are achievements that you've made. There are competencies you have, and in that combination, that threefold combination, nobody else has that but you. Why then would you want to be lumped into a group? Why? And why would you want to do that to others, to lump them in the group when there is so much richness there that the world needs, that the government so needs? I mean, it's sometimes in certain roles, it's not the most exciting. If we can be honest, it's not the most exciting. It can get pretty dull at times because you're going through the same things over and over for some roles. But if you could take and leverage your capabilities, your achievements, your competencies in such a way to bring the innovation that's necessary, do you think anybody is going to care what DEI characteristics you have or not? They want you because of what you bring to the table. And that's why I believe that this is the more important element of it. This is where we need to be focused. And in some cases, I guess for those of you in the US, you got no choice right now but to start looking alternatively, especially in government, even though some of that is being pushed onto the private sector as well. But you've got no choice. So it's a good thing for you. It's a good thing for you to be able to stop looking at how you fit into everybody else, and you're trying to hide behind a group identity when you have so much to offer. Let no one see you by your group identity. Let them start to look at you for your individuality and the benefit you're bringing to the organization, the benefit you're bringing to your city, your county, your nation. Make yourself be so individual, so unique, that they can't help but identify you as you. And they can say, there's only one of that one. There's no one like that one. That's what you're going for. So when you treat with your true leadership credibility, is going to be about manifestation, not representation. There's been so much focus on representation that people have forgotten that we need to start manifesting our leadership credibility in the places where we are positioned. We need to manifest all of that goodness that we have inside of us, all of those abilities and that capacity you have to make such a significant change, to bring innovation to the arena. That's what we want. We want to see leaders who are manifesting their leadership credibility more than focusing on how well they represent a group. And then in terms of identity, every individual, every organization, every nation has an identity. With your individual identity, you probably understand that a bit more, but the organizational and national identity, that's going to come from things like your norms, your values as the nation, the culture of the nation, the lifestyle, the practices of the nation, and how that plays out to make that nation unique. so that when you go out and every time you have an identity, it plays into the purpose for the individual, the organization, the nation. If you lose your identity in the groupthink at a national level will be you get mixed up into globalization and you forget who you are. And you just look like every other country. There's nothing different about you. You've missed your identity for the sake of the group. I want to see you pulling back and saying, how do we manifest? How do we make the most of our own identity as individuals? How do we make the most? How do we define the organizational identity? Some of you may be into the political parties. Some of you may be in a government organization. What is the identity of that organization? How does it look? What makes it unique? What makes it different from another? I know that the last year, well, prior to the last year, we in the UK had seen so much in terms of how the two major parties looked so much alike. You could pretty much say, what happened to their identity? Because how could you have two sides looking the same? Looking so similar. That was the public view, by the way. The public view was, it's so hard to choose. That's why we had such the voter turnout wasn't very good, because people did not see a unique identity even of the parties. Every organization has to have its identity. Every nation has its own identity, just like the individual. So now if we're going to move beyond DEI, that means that we're not going to be focused on the things that are not contributing or not pointing to how competent and how able a person is. We're going to be focusing on the individual. So when we look at the other stuff, we look at the things that don't matter, that don't say if this person can perform or not. We're missing the mark. We're missing the point of what we're supposed to be doing as leaders and managers. When you see yourself as a manager, it means you don't own stuff. You manage on behalf of. So if we are looking at ourselves as managers on behalf of the people, managers on behalf of their interests and the public interest and the public good and the public resources, then we cannot focus on what does not say anything to us about an individual or group's ability to perform, to do the work. We've got to lead beyond that. We can find ways to incorporate that, to ensure that it's not just one group overly represented. There are ways to do that without missing that we got to look at the management ability and we got to look at the identity, and we have to understand what's the vision driving it all. What's the vision that we have for our lives individually? What's the vision that the organization has? What's the vision for the nation? And if we are looking at all of those things coming together, how much are we aligned or not aligned with the vision? I believe that you get to a place where you realize that if there is a vision for the nation by the administration that is in power, and you are in government, and you do not want to align with that vision, you should never have to wait for somebody to fire you. You should willingly move on because you are not willing to align yourself with that vision to make it happen. You may have your own reasons for why you like it or you don't like it. Whether it's a current administration, a past administration, it doesn't make a difference. If you cannot work with the vision that you are under, and you so detest it, and you want to bring in your own vision, your own agenda, then you've missed management ability as well. You've got to come in and either submit to that vision or move on, so that somebody else who's willing to submit can submit. So we're not only looking at moving on beyond, we're moving beyond the race, we're moving beyond the preferences, we're moving beyond the age, We're moving beyond all of that stuff. And we're going to be focusing from this moment on ability. We're going to be focusing on performance. We're going to be focusing on capacity. We're going to be focusing on who can add value. We're going to be focusing on who is going to bring more to what we're doing, who is going to invest of their time, who is going to invest of themselves, of their ability to ensure that the vision can be accomplished so that they can have their leadership credibility established. Now, if you are looking to take this, you're getting your leadership credibility, go into the next level, I've got a program for you that we are getting ready to launch. It is going to be starting, it's going to be a 6-week program. We meet weekly. The upcoming cohort begins on the 26th of March, which is 2025 this year. It's called the LEAP program. So LEAP is a Leadership Excellence Accelerator program. Of course, you see it's 6 weeks, so we've got a lot to do in a short space of time. And the sessions are live, so it's not self-paced. It's an hour and a half each week to ensure that people are not only getting the time to have the training, but you also get the opportunity to have peer-to-peer mentoring. I always find that that's very interesting. Sometimes it's one thing to get information and get ideas and push from the instructor, but it's always good from the peer-to-peer mentoring perspective. Why? Because others have experiences that you can benefit from. Others have insights that you can benefit from. So yes, you get the official training, but you also get some peer-to-peer mentoring to strengthen you in your leadership development. Just wanted to give you an idea of the sessions that we'll be covering. The sessions are the leader's mindset, the purpose and vision. Remember, I said it was all about coming towards this common vision, coming towards a vision to ensure your leadership credibility. The ethical leadership. Ooh, that one's big. Now, we talked about management ability today, but for the LEAP, it'll be dealing with management accountability, because when you are in management, officially or unofficially, or you're looking to get into some kind of managerial leadership role, doesn't have to be government, it can be in politics at different ways. You have to always be prepared to give an account for your management. One of the things that we also have realized is that sometimes people want to get into certain roles, but they don't know how to be politically savvy. So we're going to be addressing that. And then the last session is going to deal with decision making. It's going to be a fantastic course. I'm telling you, it's going to be fast paced, but it's going to be good. Now, the time may be something that everybody has to work around how you do that, because it's going to be 7 p.m. London. So I'm figuring that some people may need to make some arrangements with your jobs. It's once a week, so it's only for 6 weeks. You might need to make some arrangements with your jobs to get that extra half an hour if you have an hour for lunch. But you don't want to be out of this. This is too important. This is too important to your own development, because we want to make sure that you are being selected because you have the standard of leadership excellence that they are going to be looking for. As I said, create your own table, and they want to see what's going on at your table, and they want to come over to where you are because you've got insight and you've got understanding. Okay, so that course, by the way, is 297 pounds. But I've got a surprise for you, for those of you who are interested. For 24 hours, if you wanted to sign up for that, we're actually doing something that I've never done before, so don't think this is normal. For 24 hours, even though the course is 297 pounds, for 24 hours, if you pay for the course within the next 24 hours, you will get 100 pounds off. 100 pounds off, because I so believe in this course. I so want to make sure that you're prepared for where you're going. And if you sign up within the next 48 hours, well, that means from 25 hours to 48 hours, you'll get 50 pounds off. After that, it's the full $297. Okay. Now, I'm not here to sell too much, so I want to find out if people have questions. Let's see. Did I see? Oh, there's a lot of talk here. Oh, yes, Nancy, the blind leading the blind. Gila, people are upset about DEI going away. What do you think is the main reason people are so upset? I believe the DEI pushed segregation to a degree, but more so for the LGBTQ population. I did not understand about DEI until recently. A lot of people didn't understand about it till recently, but it started to come in your face. As I said, from a global scene, some people, it's more about the gender side. They want to see more women in certain roles, particularly in politics and in political leadership. In terms of the other types of agenda, I think that varies according to country. And so I can't necessarily speak to that in a way, but that is all a part of the packaging. It's different criteria, different protected characteristics. I showed you what we have here in the UK, 9 characteristics. Different countries will push their own agenda for what matters to them. And so it's just as I said, regardless of what the characteristic is, let's just say it like that. Go back to why we should be putting people in positions. Are we putting them into positions because of their management ability? Good. And if they don't have the management ability, regardless of their preferences or their external characteristics, do we bring them on board? Do we promote them? No. Simple. We make life easier when we focus on principles and then we lead from principles. Everything else follows the principle. Everything else will follow the vision. You keep it there, things will take care of itself because you are going to be going after the people who have the most to offer. There you go. Some people have more to offer than others. There you go. It's a national security issue to think about it. Nobody's taking responsibility. There you go. Yes. It can have great implications in so many areas. And you have to be careful of why you're hiring people, why you're promoting people. Is it that they have the ability? Do they have the ability? Point blank. Let's keep it simple. Individuality will also allow you to be seen. Yes. Okay. DEI caused discrimination against certain groups? Yes, because you had discrimination in one regard and then it ended up having discrimination going the opposite way. We missed the point of what Martin Luther King wanted. Martin Luther King Jr. wanted not color of the skin. In other words, not this other stuff, but character, the content of the character. Yes, it is a big thing to see their own individuality in filling positions instead of them seeing the doing away with DEI as a slap in the face or a personal attack on them because they were part of these particular groups. This is something that I've been hearing a lot of, in that people really were getting very upset because they were saying, I know I worked hard. I know I deserve the position. I know what I bring to the table. And if you now put me in the same category as somebody who has not brought anything to the table, they've not brought ability to the table, they have not brought responsibility to the table, then you've missed it. Okay. Well, that is what we have for today. And if anybody wants to get those codes, you can always put your name, you can drop your information down in the chat and we will send the codes to you for either the 24-hour or the 48-hour. But I want to thank you all for coming today and I wish you all an enjoyable rest of the day.